In fact, it was myself and Professor Mutaka Kango, and we had to sit down there and figure out what kind of clause that we could put. So we figured out, we put in the clause, it says that the party which would produce the presidential candidate in 2017 would not be the party producing the presidential candidate in 2022. If NASA, if the NASA agreement was renewed, because as you know, these coalition agreements are for one term. So the point was, whatever you agreed in that coalition was only valid for one term. Okay? So that would then have bound ODM as long as NASA went into 2022 election as a coalition. But of course, ODM could break it by breaking the coalition. And that's the point that Kalonzo raised. He said, okay, what guarantee do I have here that ODM will not then break the coalition, therefore not honor the agreement by breaking the coalition? And there was very serious, sort of tense silence. The whole negotiations had been very tense. So the tension wasn't new. And we were sitting there, and it went on for about a minute. Kalonzo was sitting opposite Raila. I could see they were sizing each other up. It was very, something Kalonzo wanted to be said. And I said, you know what? It's a make or break. So I'll say it. I mean, we've struggled with this thing. It might as well end here. And I said, Your Excellency, nothing. There's no guarantees. This is a matter of trust. And I think he just banged the table. And he said, thank you very much. And he was looking at Raila straight in the eye. And he said, thank you very much. That sort of broke the silence. Nobody actually spoke until he then took his, I can't remember what else he said, until he then took his pen, signed the agreement. He was the first one to sign, because he was really the one who was stepping down. So he signed the document. He put it down. We were all very quiet. And once he finished signing, he stood up. And there was a bit of a sigh of relief. But yeah, it was not it was one of those moments that you felt things could have gone anyway, either way.
A declaration is hereby issued that the presidential election held on 8th August 2017 was not conducted in accordance with the Constitution and the applicable law, rendering the declared results invalid, null, and void.
But what is interesting is one of the things I remember is that we almost did not file that petition. And it looked like Raila wasn't actually too keen on filing that petition. I think the people who really, really insisted were very keen on filing that petition was Hon Kalonzo and Hon Wetangula. And there are many other things I've written about which suggest that perhaps Raila had his own track of dealing with this thing, which is what has ended up as as the handshake and the BBI. And in that sense, I think he made a mistake. It was a strategic mistake, because even after he did BBI, I and others did try to insist, even though we had had a kind of fallout around the swearing in. I did insist that, and we did insist, look, we ought to negotiate with Jubilee as a coalition. If we had sat across the table as NASA, and then Jubilee, we had Raila, so we had Uhuru and Ruto on the other side as Jubilee, we would have come out with a much better structured deal, okay?
Raila
If we had sort of buried the hatchet about the swearing in, which I think was really trivial, but the fact that they didn't come really was blown out of proportion. I remember the last meeting we had, they were there and we did the planning and all sorts of things. So the fact that they didn't come, I don't think it's neither here nor there. So, but I'm saying, if we were to ask about a counterfactual, if NASA was still intact, I think our politics would be at a different place. I think Raila would be at a different place. The problem we have in Kenya, and I'll come to that, we tend to conflate civil society with advocacy NGOs. But if you look at civil society that way, in democracy, civil society is very mainstream in politics. If you look at the UK, the Labour Party is owned by the unions. In fact, they pay subscriptions. It's financed. So it represents Labour. The Conservative Party is heavily funded by industry. Organizations like our equivalent of KEPSA, the Confederation of British Industry and others. If you look at Kenya, in the 70s, one of the things that KANU did very well was to co-opt the biggest civil society platforms in the country, Maendeleo ya Wanawake and KOTU, and the labor movement. And once they co-opted that, it was very difficult for opposition. So that's really where civil society. So, and when people ask what has happened to civil society, what you really want to focus on is what has happened to what are the SUPKEMs and the KOTUs and the KUPETs and the National Council of Churches of Kenya and the Catholic Justice and Peace Commission. What are those ones doing? NAC happened because we were fighting KANU. Okay? And that alliance then in 2003, NAC happened, it won power, and many of those individuals went into government. Okay? Once they went into government, that sort of tended to deflate that movement quite a bit. What should civil society be doing? Those organizations should be politically aligned. I would expect to see the more labor type industry aligning to particular political movements. The ones who are pro-business aligning to parties or whatever else which they think are pro-business. So that's how they are the foundation of politics. What has happened here is that we have developed a third sector called advocacy NGOs. And really that you might want to call, it's mostly the intelligentsia. Yeah? But it's not been able to be very active in politics for precisely the reasons that it doesn't have a political constituency. It doesn't have votes. One of the challenges you have is that ultimately politics is about citizens, not organizations. So if you want to talk about politics, Wangari may have been sort of a big civil society leader of the Green Belt movement and on the environment, but when she went into politics as, you know, Wangari Maathai as a citizen, and she didn't do as well as people might have expected, and that's the nature of politics. You need to have a constituency you're speaking to. If you look at the way the politics is panning out, and I can see what I'm saying about it is making very many people uncomfortable on social media. I see it as I study the polls, and there's been quite a few. I've seen quite a few polls all the way back to November, December, mid last year. And if you look at those polls, this is a story I see. You've got William Ruto leading as a front runner with about 40% of the vote.
Kwani mnafikiri Kenya ni yenu peke yenu? Watu wawache mchezo nani?
The second largest block is undecided voters at about 25. Then you've got Raila Odinga in the 15 to 20% range.
BBI jaletwa ili Raila Odinga awe rais wa Kenya.
And then all the other candidates with the other 20%. So if you do that math, the way I read it is that you've got Ruto at 40%. That's a poor, because actually that's about where our poverty line is. Yeah. So William Ruto has his constituency. It is the poor. He's mobilizing the poor, and I can see it's making a lot of people very uncomfortable. But there you are. Then you've got on the other side about 35% who are supporting their tribal chiefs. Yeah, they still want to vote for their tribal leader. So that would be, I think, the constituency that is being called dynasties, are trying to form what is that's the BBI constituency model, which is trying to form what is called sometimes consociational politics, of getting a couple of big tribes together, and then the big tribes form a sort of stable coalition. But I don't think 35 to 40% is big enough to do that, to achieve that. So the numbers in the middle, the undecided, I see that as the middle class. So there is a constituency which does obviously not poor, because the interesting thing is that the 40% that you see William Ruto is very cross-ethnic. So clearly some class sort of coalescence around material issues is beginning to crystallize. Then you have, of course, the people who are sticking with our traditional sort of patrimonial system, patrimonial politics. Then you have this 25% who don't belong to either the poor, and they sort of feel they have some interest to protect the middle class, but they don't want to belong to the patrimonial politics. So the question is, can this formation be able to capture that constituency? I think they can, but there's work to do. I think there is an opportunity, but you really need to be clear who your constituency is and what your offering is. I am skeptical about saying that you're just going to be a party of clean people, because that's what we did in 2003. In NAC, we had the same sort of civil society, advocacy CSO people like Kiraito Murungi and others, who are clean. And then we went into, and including politicals like Anyang and others that people are mentioning, and we went into NAC, into government, with KANU people who are very corrupt. We went in with the Saitoris and other people who joined in the last minute from the LDP wing. And within months, it had flipped. The clean CSO people were now the most corrupt. And some of the KANU people, like the late George Saitori, God rest his soul, actually came out as one of the best performing sort of ministers and never got into any other sort of scandals during the NAC regime. So my lesson from that is you don't judge people, because I've been disappointed by some of my closest sort of friends who I thought I could vouch for in terms of integrity, and I think the way we are going to fight corruption in this country, because it's a systemic problem, it is actually one of the defining characters of our state. Okay? We are going to fight corruption by agreeing to transform the state as we have written in our new constitution. Okay? And one of the most important instruments for not just fighting corruption we have in the new constitution is transitional justice mechanism. Because a transitional justice mechanism allows you to stop recrimination and say, I am better than you, or you are better than me. And this thing of witch hunting, who are clean, who is dirty, what is the ground, this question of some people putting themselves on a moral pedestal and judging others, I consider just hypocrisy. So what we want to do is draw a line and say past corruption, yeah, and human rights abuses and many other things as they are there in the TJRC report, and land grabbing and many sort of sins of our past. We put them offline, yeah, and we give them to independent people. We get a bunch of priests and other good people in society, and we process them there, yeah, and we close that chapter. Then we say, from here going forward, we are going to let our institutions do their work so that there is nobody who has an incentive to interfere with EACC. There is nobody who has an incentive to interfere with whatever, to protect themselves from their past, because we have sort of drawn a line and we have put the past aside and it's being dealt with there. We saw the South Africans do it. If they could do it with apartheid crimes, yeah, and be able to sort of remove that from, so that society can move on. I think the nature of corruption in this country is such that that's the only, I think, way that we need to deal with society. You know, we were already headed into the economic doldrums before COVID, because driven largely by public debt distress, and also the fact that, and related to that, the fact that basically the Jubilee government has not done much to help the economy. They were so preoccupied with infrastructure projects and all sorts of government things that they completely neglected doing the things which drive the economy, which is raising productivity, you know, dealing with providing services that raise productivity and other things. I don't know how the things that the government has been doing has no connection with the real economy of production. We have a weak economy and fiscal distress, and then you have COVID. So COVID has actually, obviously, like many other countries, made the financial situation of the government even more precarious. So government is going to struggle a lot. I don't know how it's going to survive the next 2 years. What we have seen for them is a lot of distress borrowing, more distress borrowing, and you're seeing a lot more programmed. And the reason for that is because at some point, you know, there's this saying that if you owe the bank 1,000 shillings, you're in trouble. But if you owe the bank 10 million shillings, it's the bank which is in trouble. 1 billion shillings. So in this case, because we owe so much, it is our creditors who are in trouble. So it is their interest to sort of give us a lifeline, a financial lifeline, so that we don't collapse. Yeah? So they are trying to sort of stave us default, largely because given our importance in this region, and particularly in the frontier markets, I think if we go into default, it may have what you call contagion effects. So that's where we are, treading water on a lifeline provided by our creditors. I don't know how much it can go, further it can go on. At some point, it has to be resolved, and it usually takes some trigger, which breaks the camel's back. Yeah, my own sense is that probably the best case scenario is one where the current government kicks the can down the road, hopes that there is no trigger for financial meltdown, and then the next government will probably take up the problem and try and resolve it. So we may just sort of survive. The interesting thing in our countries in Africa is that there is, and we are seeing it now, there is a considerable disconnect between the economy of Mwananchi and this formal corporatized economy, the economy that William Ruto and his people are calling hustler nation. Particularly if you go rural, that economy is quite clearly a lot more resilient than the sort of very corporatized, financialized, mostly urban middle class economy and the state. So my own sense is that what COVID has done is push people further into that sort of economy and put a bigger premium on resilience. So I'm seeing anecdotes of a lot more people going up country, you know, because survival has become difficult in urban areas. But I think the most problematic, the biggest nut to crack is education.
I said we have given January 2021, but it is not cast in stone. It will depend on the behavior of the virus and the advice we get from the Ministry of Health.
I think we need to worry because kids are have more immunity. They're not getting as affected by COVID, but they can pass it on. So the question is, are we opening super spreader centers? You know, where the kids come to school, they sort of whatever, and then they take it back home. So that's something to worry about. And then the fact that you're seeing a second cycle of COVID out there, the question is, if this then becomes a second cycle and it goes on for another year, we do have to come up with a solution for education. And so it's one thing, opening is not a solution. It's a risk you're taking. So let's say you open, and within a couple of weeks, the numbers start going up. What do? You shut down again. So you haven't solved the problem. That's what I'm saying. I have argued many times that COVID is not a passing cloud. If it is something that we are going to live with for a long time, I think that education is probably even a bigger challenge for the economy. Because economically, people tend to adapt. It's actually, I think, easier to adapt economically. But I think to adapting the education system is a much bigger, much more difficult issue.